I honestly thought my parents were joking when they said they couldn't attend my wedding. I even laughed at first. I mean, who says that to their own daughter? We were on a video call, finalizing the guest list, when my mom sighed deeply and said, "Sweetheart, we just don't think we can emotionally handle another wedding this year." Another wedding. I blinked, waiting for her to smile, for my dad to roll his eyes and say she was being dramatic. Instead, he nodded, slowly, calmly, like this made perfect sense. "Your sister already got married," my mom continued. "It wouldn't be fair to take attention away from her special year." That's when my laughter died in my throat, because in that moment, I realized this wasn't about money, travel, or timing. It was about something much worse. They weren't saying they couldn't come. They were saying they chose not to. And somehow I was expected to understand. After the call ended, I sat there staring at my laptop screen long after it went dark. My reflection looked confused, smaller somehow, like I'd just been told something so absurd that my brain refused to accept it. I replayed my mom's words over and over. Emotionally handle another wedding. Maybe she meant the travel was exhausting. Maybe money was tight. Maybe they were overwhelmed and hadn't explained it well. My parents weren't perfect, but they weren't cruel. At least that's what I'd always told myself. So I did what I always did when something hurt. I tried to be reasonable. The next morning, I called my mom again. I kept my voice light, careful, like I was stepping around broken glass. "Mom," I said gently, "I just want to make sure I understood you correctly yesterday. You're really saying you can't come at all?" There was a pause. Not the confused kind. The deliberate kind. "Yes," she said. "That's what we decided." "We decided." My dad's voice joined in from somewhere off-screen. "It's not personal, honey. It's just a lot this year." I swallowed. "But it's my wedding." Another pause. "Your sister already had hers," my mom replied. "We gave her our full energy. We don't want to cheapen that by turning this year into a wedding marathon." Cheapen. That word landed harder than I expected. "I'm not asking for a second celebration," I said. "I'm asking you to be there. To sit in the front row. To watch me get married." My dad cleared his throat. "You have to understand. Family balance matters." Balance. I felt something tighten in my chest. "So, you're worried about balance. Between me and Sarah." My mom sighed, like I was being difficult. Why does everything have to be a comparison? I almost laughed at that. Because somehow in this family it always was. I tried one last time. I told them the date again. The venue. That it was just a small ceremony. That I didn't need speeches or attention or even help, just their presence. "We'll think about it," my mom said. But her tone told me everything. When the call ended, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand, staring at my wedding invitation lying beside me. My name printed neatly next to my fiancé's. A day I'd dreamed about since I was a kid. And for the first time, a quiet, terrifying thought crept in. What if this wasn't a misunderstanding at all? What if this was who they'd always been, and I just never wanted to see it? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' faces from that call, calm, certain, already moved on. So I did the one thing I'd been trying not to do. I thought about my sister's wedding. Sarah got married in April. Destination ceremony. Ocean view. 200 guests. My mom flew out early to help, then stayed an extra week because she just couldn't leave the magic yet. She sent photos every day. Changed her profile picture 3 times. Told anyone who would listen that it was the happiest moment of her life. I remembered standing beside her in Cabo, holding her bouquet while my mom adjusted her veil for the 10th time. I remember my dad clinking his glass at the rehearsal dinner, calling Sarah our pride and joy, his voice thick with emotion. Back then, I told myself it didn't bother me. But now, lying alone in my bed, it all replayed differently. When I got engaged 6 months later, my mom's reaction had been quieter. A smile, a hug, a quick, "That's wonderful, sweetheart."
No tears.
No Facebook post. No countdown calendar on the fridge. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that I was being sensitive, that maybe my parents were just tired after everything they'd poured into Sarah's wedding. So the next day, I called my dad. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need to understand something. If I were the one who got married first, would this still be the answer?" He didn't respond right away. "Well," he said slowly, "that's not really the point." My stomach dropped. "So it is about Sarah," I whispered. "It's about not creating competition between sisters," he replied. "Your mother, and I just want to keep the peace."
Peace.
I stared at the wall as the word echoed in my head. Because apparently, in order to keep peace in this family, I was expected to quietly accept being less celebrated, less supported, less important. When I hung up, I opened my phone and scrolled through my mom's social media. Photo after photo from Sarah's wedding. Captions full of hearts and exclamation points. My girl. My beautiful daughter. Best day ever. There wasn't a single mention of my upcoming wedding. And that's when it finally hit me. This wasn't about exhaustion. This was about hierarchy. And I had just learned exactly where I stood. After that call with my dad, I told myself I wouldn't cry. I told myself I would handle this like a grown woman. So instead of spiraling, I sat down and wrote out what I wanted to say. Not angrily. Not emotionally. Just clearly. I listed dates.
Costs.
Logistics. I even wrote down sentences like, I respect your feelings, and I'm not asking for anything extra. 2 days later, I called my parents together. I don't want this to turn into an argument, I said as soon as they answered. I just want to talk it through. My mom crossed her arms on screen. We've already talked it through. I know, I said carefully, but I need you to hear me. I explained that my wedding wasn't a replacement for Sarah's, that it wasn't a threat, that love didn't run out because one daughter used it earlier in the year. I reminded them that I'd never ask them to choose between us. My dad leaned back in his chair. You're overthinking this, Emily. There it was. I'm not, I said quietly. I'm reacting to being told my parents won't come to my wedding. My mom sighed, the same tired sigh she used whenever I pushed back as a kid. Why are you making this so dramatic? That question hurt more than anything else she'd said so far. I'm not being dramatic, I replied. I'm being honest. She shook her head. You've always been sensitive. You read too much into things. Sensitive. Another familiar word. So, you don't see how this hurts me? I asked. My dad stepped in. Of course we do. But sometimes, being a good parent means not giving each child the exact same thing. I stared at him. I'm not asking for the same thing. I'm asking for the bare minimum. Silence stretched between us. Finally, my mom spoke. We just don't want Sarah to feel like her moment is being overshadowed. That's when it clicked. So my wedding does overshadow hers, I said slowly. No, she snapped. You're twisting my words. But I wasn't. I could hear it now, clearly. The unspoken rule. The one I'd followed my whole life without realizing it. If something made Sarah uncomfortable, I was expected to shrink. And if I didn't, I was the problem. When the call ended, my hands were shaking, not from anger, but from the exhaustion of trying to be understood by people who had already decided I wasn't worth listening to. For the first time, I stopped asking myself what I'd done wrong. And started asking a much harder question. What if I was never going to be enough for them, no matter how carefully I explained myself? After that conversation with my parents, I did something I should have done much earlier. I called my sister. Sarah answered on the third ring, cheerful as always. Hey, what's up? I almost laughed at how normal she sounded, like nothing in the world was wrong. Did Mom and Dad talk to you about my wedding? I asked. There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. They mentioned it, she said carefully. Mentioned what, exactly? Another pause. That they're not coming, she replied. And that it's complicated. Complicated. Sarah, I said, lowering my voice, did you tell them not to come? What? No, she said quickly. Too quickly. Why would I do that? Because they keep talking about your feelings, I said. About not taking attention away from your year. About protecting your moment. She exhaled slowly. Look, Emily, I didn't ask for any of this. But you knew, I said. You knew they weren't coming before they told me, didn't you? Silence. That silence felt heavier than any argument. I thought it would blow over, she finally said. I thought you'd understand. Understand what? That Mom gets overwhelmed, she continued. And that after everything she put into my wedding, she just doesn't have anything left. So, I get whatever's left over? I asked. That's not what I meant, but it's what you said. She sounded frustrated now. Why are you turning this into a competition? I closed my eyes. I didn't, I said quietly. They did. And you let them. Her voice softened. Emily, you know how they are. If I push back, it just makes things worse. For who? I asked. She didn't answer. I felt something sink in my chest then, something cold and final. Sarah wasn't just a bystander in this. She wasn't confused or unaware. She was choosing comfort over fairness. Peace over honesty. And silence over me. I'm not asking you to fight them, I said. I'm asking you to tell the truth. To say this isn't okay. She hesitated. I don't want to be in the middle. I swallowed hard. You're already in the middle, I said. You just picked the side where you don't lose anything. When the call ended, I sat there holding my phone, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. It hurt realizing my parents were capable of this. But realizing my sister was willing to let it happen, that hurt in a completely different way. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the moment everything finally stopped being hidden. I didn't plan to confront my parents again. Not after the last call. Not after the way my sister's silence had settled into something unmistakable. But 2 days later, my mom called me.
Her voice was calm.
Pleasant even. Like we were about to discuss grocery lists or holiday plans. Sweetheart, she said, we've been thinking maybe it would be best if we all talk together. Clear the air. I almost said no. But some part of me still needed to hear the truth without the careful phrasing. Without the soft excuses. So that evening, I joined the video call. My parents sat side by side on the couch. My dad's arm rested behind my mom's shoulders, protective, united. I noticed immediately what was missing. Sarah wasn't there. I thought this was a family conversation, I said. My mom waved her hand dismissively. She doesn't need to be involved. This is between us. That was the first crack. I took a breath. I just need one thing explained to me. Honestly.
No metaphors.
No vague language. My dad nodded. Go ahead. Why, I asked slowly, is my wedding being treated like a problem? My mom exchanged a look with him. A silent conversation I wasn't part of. Finally, she said, because timing matters. Timing for what? For feelings, she replied. For harmony. I leaned forward. Whose feelings? She didn't answer right away. Then my dad did. Sarah's. There it was. Out in the open. No more dancing around it. So you're skipping my wedding? I said, my voice shaking despite myself. Because you're afraid Sarah might feel uncomfortable? My mom frowned. Uncomfortable isn't the right word. What is then? She's still in her newlywed phase, my mom said. This was her year. Her moment. We don't want anything to interfere with that. I stared at them, stunned. You think my wedding interferes with hers? I asked. My dad sighed. It's not about interference. It's about not forcing comparisons. Comparisons. The word landed like a verdict. So, what happens if you come to my wedding? I pressed. What's the worst-case scenario you're trying to avoid? My mom finally looked me straight in the eye. She might feel like we're shifting our focus, she said. And that wouldn't be fair to her. I felt my chest tighten. And it is fair to me? I asked quietly. My mom's voice hardened. Emily, you've always been more independent. You don't need us the way she does. There it was. The justification I'd heard my entire life, finally weaponized. So, because I learned how to survive without asking for much, I said, you decided I deserve even less? That's not what we're saying, my dad cut in. But it is what you're doing. Silence filled the screen. I realized then that this conversation wasn't about convincing them. It never had been. They weren't confused. They weren't overwhelmed. They had made a choice. And worse, they believed it was the right one. I just want to be clear, I said, my voice steady now in a way it hadn't been before. You are choosing not to attend my wedding. My mom nodded once. Yes. Because attending it would make my sister uncomfortable. Another nod. And you're okay with how that makes me feel. My dad hesitated, then said, we hope you'll understand. I let out a slow breath. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not sadness.
Clarity.
Okay, I said simply. My mom blinked. Okay. Yes, I repeated. I understand. The call ended shortly after. I sat there alone in my apartment, my phone still warm in my hand, my heart pounding. Not because I'd been rejected, but because I'd finally seen the truth. This wasn't neglect. This was a hierarchy. And I had just learned exactly where I stood. The morning of my wedding arrived quietly. Too quietly. Sunlight filtered through the hotel curtains, warm and gentle, like it was trying to convince me that this was just another ordinary day. My bridesmaids bustled around the room, hair curling, dresses steaming, laughter drifting through the air, but every time someone asked, have your parents arrived yet? My stomach tightened. No, I said. They won't be. I didn't explain. I couldn't. When I put on my dress, my hands shook. Not because I was nervous about marrying the love of my life, but because there was an empty space in the room that felt impossibly loud. The chair where my mom should have been. The moment where my dad should have knocked on the door and made a joke to hide his emotions. Instead, there was silence. My fiancé, Daniel, took my hands and looked at me carefully. Are you sure you're okay? I nodded. It wasn't exactly a lie. I wasn't okay, but I was steady. There's a difference. The ceremony began on time. Guests turned in their seats, scanning the front row. I saw the confusion ripple outward in small, quiet ways. Whispers. Raised eyebrows. Someone leaning toward another person and murmuring my parents' names. I walked down the aisle anyway. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I didn't stop. I kept my eyes forward. I focused on Daniel's face, on the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. When we reached the altar, the officiant smiled warmly and began. And still those 2 empty seats remained. The ceremony itself was beautiful, heartfelt,
Real.
when Daniel said his vows, my throat tightened, not from pain, but from relief. From the certainty that this was what love actually looked like, showing up, choosing someone even when it's inconvenient. Applause filled the room when we kissed. But the tension didn't disappear. It followed us into the reception, clinging to the edges of every conversation. I felt it when relatives hugged me a little too tightly, when friends said, "You look stunning," but avoided my eyes afterward. When someone asked Daniel quietly, "Are her parents?" and trailed off. During dinner, my maid of honor stood to give her speech. She spoke about friendship, resilience, and how I'd always been the one who showed up for everyone else. Her voice wavered near the end. I knew then that people noticed. When it was time for my thank you speech, I stood slowly and picked up the microphone. The room hushed. I thanked Daniel's parents first, for their warmth, their generosity, and for welcoming me like family, without hesitation. I thanked my friends, my bridesmaids, the people who had stood beside me without conditions. Then I paused. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I also want to acknowledge the people who couldn't be here today, I said carefully. Not because of distance or circumstance, but because they made a choice. The room went completely still. I've learned this year that love isn't measured by how loudly someone celebrates you, I continued. It's measured by whether they show up when it matters. I didn't name my parents. I didn't need to. I'm grateful for everyone who did. I set the microphone down and walked back to my seat. My hands were trembling, but my voice hadn't been. Later that evening, as the music played and people danced, my phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from my mom. "We hope the day went well. We didn't want any hard feelings." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I turned the phone face down. Because standing there, surrounded by people who had chosen to be present, something finally became clear. My parents hadn't missed my wedding. They had attended exactly the family they believed in. And for the first time, I understood that the emptiness I'd been trying to fill my whole life wasn't my fault. It was theirs. The wedding ended the way weddings usually do. Music fading, candles burning low, guests drifting out into the night with smiles and tired feet. But for me, everything felt different after the last song played. The next morning, Daniel and I woke up to dozens of messages. Some were simple congratulations. Others were more careful. "Are you okay? I hope yesterday wasn't too hard." A few relatives didn't bother with subtlety at all. "I can't believe your parents actually didn't show up. What were they thinking?" I didn't respond to those right away. I needed space before I said something I couldn't take back. 2 days later, my parents called again. This time, I didn't rush to answer. I watched the phone vibrate on the counter until it stopped. Then it rang again. And again. When I finally picked up, my mom spoke first. "We feel like you embarrassed us," she said. That sentence landed harder than anything before it. "Embarrassed you?" I repeated. "You didn't come. But you made it sound intentional," my dad added. "People are talking." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully familiar. "So this is about appearances," I said. "Not about how I felt." My mom bristled. "You could have protected the family image." I took a deep breath. "I did. By telling the truth without attacking you." There was a long pause. "We didn't expect you to make a point," my dad said finally. "And I didn't expect you to skip my wedding," I replied. "But here we are." That was the moment something shifted. For the first time, I wasn't pleading. I wasn't explaining. I wasn't shrinking myself to make them comfortable. I told them I needed distance, not as punishment, but as protection. "I'm not cutting you off," I said. "I'm setting boundaries." My mom's voice tightened. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "that I won't pretend this didn't hurt me. And I won't accept being treated as optional." They didn't argue. They didn't apologize either. When the call ended, my hands weren't shaking like they used to. I felt tired, but lighter. In the weeks that followed, I noticed something strange. The silence wasn't as loud as I'd feared. Without the constant pressure to explain myself, I started sleeping better, laughing more easily, making plans without wondering how they'd be received. Daniel's family invited us over for Sunday dinners.
No tensión. No comparisons.
Just warmth. And slowly, painfully, I realized something that changed everything. I hadn't lost my family at my wedding. I had finally stopped chasing people who'd already decided where I belonged. And that realization, quiet as it was, felt like the beginning of something new. It's been several months since my wedding. Time has a strange way of softening sharp edges without erasing the truth underneath them. The pain isn't gone, but it's clearer now. Less confusing. Less personal. For a long time, I believed that love was something you earned by being patient, understanding, and quiet. I thought that if I explained myself well enough, waited long enough, or gave enough grace, the people I loved would eventually meet me where I stood. But here's the truth I had to learn the hard way. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It's control. My parents didn't miss my wedding because of bad timing or emotional exhaustion. They missed it because, in their world, affection was a limited resource, and someone always had to receive less. That someone happened to be me. What changed my life wasn't cutting them off in anger. It was stopping the negotiation. Stopping the endless inner debate about whether my feelings were valid enough. Stopping the belief that being independent meant I didn't deserve support. I learned that boundaries aren't punishments. They're protections. I learned that family isn't defined by biology or tradition, but by who shows up when it matters, without conditions or comparisons. And most importantly, I learned that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own story, if you've ever felt like love in your family came with rules you never agreed to, I hope you hear this. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking for too much. And you don't have to compete for a place you already deserve. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't holding on. It's letting go and building something healthier in its place.